Hello everyone, today we will go over how to add a VM to your HyperV console, assuming that you already have it installed. If you don't have it installed, please check the description below. I will post a link on how you can get HyperV installed on your computer, as long as it supports it. To start with the process, let's go to Start button and find HyperV. Open up HyperV, it should look like this. And then here, I also have a Windows 10 ISO already created. If you don't have one, I will also post a link on how to download Windows 10 specifically. However, Hyper-V will support multiple operating systems, including Linux, and I believe even Mac. For Mac, however, you may have a lot of driver issues and will have to rig the setup a lot. So uh, good luck if you are able to get it to work correctly. Anyways, we can go to the Hyper-V manager, and to create a VM, all you have to do is click New Virtual Machine. You can read this if you like, or choose to not show it again. Here we give it the machine name, so I'm gonna call it Win10_1, just so I know this is my first test Windows 10 machine. So you can name it more specific things, like the reason why you're going to be creating the machine, but I'm not planning to keep it, so this name is fine for me. Here you can choose if you want to change the location of where the machine is stored by default. So I'll leave it there. I do have multiple hard drives, so it is recommended that you store it on a data drive and not on the system drive. My system drive is the fastest though, being an NVMe, and since I'm not using this, this is fine for now. So I'm gonna click Next. For Windows 10, I'm going to be using Generation 2 since it's UEFI capable, and I'm also gonna be installing the 64-bit version. Generation 1 will also work, and you may have to use that for other operating systems. But for Windows 10, it is recommended I use Generation 2. Here, I am going to start using I'm going to assign 4 gigabytes of RAM. If you don't know how to get the count on the gigabytes of RAM that you have assigned on your computer, you can go to calculator and then calculate 1024, which is a gigabyte, times the amount that you want. So times 4 would be 496. So assuming that you want that, that's fine. Of course, you should never, well, you can over provision RAM, but you should not do it if you don't have to. To figure out how much RAM you have, you can go to Device Manager. Sorry, not Device Manager. You can probably find it from there too, but this is easier. If you go to this PC on File Explorer, right click and then click Properties, you will see the installed amount of RAM. And then now if you want to see how much RAM you're actually using, you can right click and say Task Manager. It will open up this window here, and then go to Performance and the memory. So currently I'm using about 5.3 gigabytes out of the 24 that I have available. So if I assign it 4, the maximum amount that it's going to be using is 4, so that means about 9-ish or so, which should not impact my host computer. Windows 10 does require at least 2 gigabytes to run properly. You can run it on 1, it just runs fairly slow. Even with 2, you cannot really do much on it. So you can always change the RAM amount if you need more or less later on. So let's proceed with this. I did uncheck dynamic memory. I'll go over this in a little bit. Here for the connection, for the networking, I'm going to select the default switch. You can go ahead and configure your own switch and your own VLANs and stuff if you would like. For this, I am keeping it simple. Most of you probably don't have a VLANs or anything like that, a subnetted network in your homes. So default VLAN should be enough for you. Click Next, and then here is to create the hard drive size. So you can create one, you can choose an existing one if you're just going to mount a hard drive like for data for an existing VM, or you can choose to attach one later. On this case, I am going to create one. I'm only going to give out about 40 gigs because Windows 10 by default uses about 35 gigs or so once it's installed and updated. And then I'm assuming I will use about 5 gigabytes on it to install the application I will be testing afterwards before deleting this machine. Uh, One thing to keep in mind, it is very simple to expand the drive. It is very difficult, if not impossible, to well, it's not impossible, but it is very difficult to decrease the amount that you've allocated to the hard drive. So this looks good for me. I'm gonna click next. Now you can choose to install an operating system later, or choose an ISO now, or do a PITC install. If you're watching this video, you're probably not doing this. So I'm going to select an ISO file, which is the ISO for Windows 10 that I have on my desktop. Again, if you don't know how to download an ISO file, check the other link on the description. So the ISO file is on my desktop. I'm selecting the file and clicking opening. So here I'm going to click next. And then this is just a summary of everything you've set so far on the machine. And I will click finish. So once that's complete, we now have the VM here. So there's a few other things that you should check before turning it on. So you can right click on the machine and then click settings. And then one of the things I want to check is the processor. So the processor, by default, it will choose one processor, which you'll probably have a bad experience with that. So be mindful of how many processors you allocate. HyperV especially gives you a relatively good page of what it would use. So for example, one processor will use about 6% of my total processing capacity on this computer. So if I give it 4 processors, it's about 25%. And these are 4 virtual processors, which basically means about 4 cores. To determine how many cores you do have, you can do it 2 ways. You can go to Task Manager again, and then click on CPU, and this is the overall capacity. So I'm using about 3% right now. The computer's not really doing anything though, so that's to be expected. If you want to see your logical processors, you can right click anywhere within the graph and say logical processors, and then you can see I have 16 cores. It's basically 8 physical and then 8 virtual cores. Another way that you can find it is by going to Device Manager, by just searching here Device Manager. It will open up this window, and then here you can go to Processor, and then you can see the processor there, as well as the processor name. This is an older processor, but it does work fine for my needs still. So I'll keep this VM on 4 processors. Um, Try to not assign it more than 25% or 50% of your total processor capacity, so your host machine doesn't also start crawling and blue screens or something from lack of resources or anyways. So I'm gonna apply that setting, and then everything else here should be fine the way it is for Windows 10. Linux may not be able to have the secure boot module enabled as of this video, or at least some of the distribution groups I've tried so far. So once you've changed everything or adjusted everything that you wanted, you can click OK. Most of these settings, just uh, as a heads up, can only be changed when the machine is turned off. If the machine is turned on, it will be grayed out, just like everything like this is. One more thing I said I was going to keep touch base on is on the dynamic memory. The dynamic memory is where you can set a minimum amount of RAM and then allows a buffer and a maximum amount of RAM. So here you can choose another amount of RAM that you would like the machine to try to use up if it needed that memory. So uh, it, I personally like just to keep the set amount and then know that it won't use more than that. If you want to enable dynamic memory, it is enabled by default. But I've had it where it just uses too much RAM for basic things, or I forget to close something on that and it continues to shoot through my RAM, and then I have to go back and uh, close that application or something. So it's just annoying for me, but it is selected by default, so it is recommended by Microsoft. So you can use it if you like. So I'm gonna click OK, close this, and then I'm going to try turning on this virtual machine. So here you can press any key there. I don't know if you saw it. It was quick there. To boot from the CD, which you do want to do. It's going to boot from the ISO file. Here you can choose 32-bit or 64-bit. If you don't have too much RAM available on your computer, you should do 32-bit. But that means that you have to create the machine using the generation 1, not the generation 2 mode. I forgot. If you cannot change that, you cannot change this now. It can only be created like that. So I'm going to say 64-bit, and this is how you boot up a virtual machine. Depending on the OS that you installed, the different menus would be different, of course, than Windows 10, or even if you watch this video a few months from now, Windows might have changed the ways that their menus look currently. Anyways, I thank you for watching, subscribe, and see you next time.